The classroom door opened slowly. A soldier stood there, tall, still. His uniform looked clean, but his eyes carried the weight of places no child should ever see. Inside the classroom, children were laughing, coloring pictures, living another ordinary morning. Then the teacher spoke softly. "Emily, someone is here to see you." The little girl turned around slowly. Her small shoes scraped lightly against the floor. Her eyes found the soldier standing in the doorway. She studied his face carefully. Silence slowly filled the room. The soldier smiled gently. His heart was beating faster than it ever had on any battlefield. He had imagined this moment every night for 2 years, 2 birthdays missed, 2 Christmas mornings far from home, 2 long years of counting the days. But the little girl didn't smile. Instead, her eyebrows slowly pulled together. Confusion. She leaned closer to her teacher and whispered something so quietly that almost no one heard it. But the soldier did. "Who is that man?" And in that moment, Sergeant Daniel Carter felt his heart drop, because after 2 long years of war, his own daughter didn't recognize him. But to understand how this moment happened, we need to go back. Back before the silence, back before the distance, back to the day everything changed. 2 years earlier, Texas. Early morning sunlight filled the Carter family kitchen. The smell of coffee floated through the house. Emily sat at the table with cereal scattered across the surface. Her small legs swung under the chair. Daniel Carter stood near the counter tying his boots. Emily looked up. "Daddy?" Daniel turned and smiled. "Yeah, peanut?" She lifted her spoon proudly. "I made a mess." Daniel laughed softly. "I can see that." He walked over and wiped the milk from the table. Emily watched him carefully. "Daddy, are you going to work today?" Daniel paused for a moment, just a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I am." Emily smiled and went back to eating. For her, it was just another morning. But for Daniel, it was the morning everything would change, because an hour later, his phone rang. And on the other side of that call was the word every military family knows: deployment. 6 months overseas. That's what they told him. 6 months away. 6 months from home. 6 months from the little girl sitting at the kitchen table. Daniel stared at the phone for a long time. Emily was still eating cereal, still swinging her legs, still believing the world was simple. Daniel slowly walked toward the window. Outside, the street looked quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace soldiers learn to appreciate in ways others never understand. Behind him, Emily suddenly spoke again. "Daddy?" Daniel turned. "Hey, yeah?" She smiled. "Can you come to my school tomorrow?" Daniel felt something tighten inside his chest. "What happens tomorrow?" Emily grinned. "I have to draw my hero." Daniel forced a smile. "Your hero?" Emily nodded proudly. "I'm going to draw you." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. Then, he whispered something only she could hear. "I'll always be there for you." But deep down, Daniel already knew something. The world was about to test that promise. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. The house was quiet. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch with her stuffed bear resting on her chest. Daniel sat in the living room, staring at the deployment papers on the table. 6 months. That's what the paper said. 6 months overseas. He had seen deployments before. He knew something the paper didn't say. 6 months could easily become longer, sometimes much longer. Daniel leaned back and rubbed his face slowly. Across the room, Emily shifted in her sleep. Her small voice murmured softly, "Daddy." Daniel stood up immediately. He walked over and gently lifted her into his arms. She didn't wake up. Her head rested against his shoulder. For a moment, he simply stood there, holding her, memorizing the weight of his daughter in his arms, because soldiers learn something very quickly. Moments like this don't last forever. The next morning came faster than Daniel expected. Emily sat at the kitchen table again, swinging her legs, talking about school, talking about the picture she planned to draw, her hero. Daniel listened quietly. Every word felt heavier now. Emily suddenly looked up. "Daddy," Daniel smiled. "Yeah? Will you come to school today?" Daniel hesitated, just for a moment. Then he shook his head gently. "Not today, Peanut." Emily frowned slightly. "But I wanted you to see my drawing." Daniel walked over and crouched beside her chair. "I promise you'll show it to me when I get back." Emily tilted her head. "When you get back from where?" Daniel felt that tight feeling in his chest again. He took a slow breath. "Daddy has to go help some people for a while." Emily thought about that. Then she nodded. "Okay, children trust simple answers. Adults carry the complicated ones." 2 days later, Daniel stood at the military base. Soldiers were loading equipment into large transport vehicles. Engines rumbled. Voices echoed across the open air. Some soldiers laughed. Others stayed quiet. Everyone had someone they were leaving behind. Daniel adjusted the straps on his gear. A young soldier walked up beside him. Private Lucas Ramirez, barely 22 years old. Ramirez looked nervous. "So, this your first deployment, Sergeant?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Ramirez forced a smile. "Any advice?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he said something simple. "Stick close to your team." Ramirez nodded. Daniel continued. "And write home." Ramirez looked surprised. "Letters?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Letters matter more than you think." Hours later, the transport plane lifted into the sky. Texas slowly disappeared below the clouds. Daniel sat near the window. The engines roared around him, but his mind was somewhere else, back in a small kitchen, with cereal spilled across the table, with a little girl swinging her legs in a chair. Emily. Daniel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Emily's drawing, a stick-figure soldier, a big smile, and the words written carefully across the top, "My hero." Daniel stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he whispered quietly, "I'll come back." Months passed. The desert was hotter than Daniel expected. Days were long. Nights were longer. Sand covered everything: boots, clothes, equipment. Even the air felt heavy. Daniel's unit spent most days on patrol, long drives across empty roads, watching, listening, waiting. War, Daniel learned again, was mostly waiting, waiting for something to happen, and hoping it didn't. One night the soldiers sat outside their temporary base. The sky above them was full of stars. Ramirez leaned back against a supply crate. "You ever think about home out here?" Daniel looked up at the sky. "Every day." Ramirez nodded slowly. "I miss my mom's cooking." One of the other soldiers laughed. "Man, I miss real showers." The group chuckled quietly. Small laughter, small comforts, moments that made the distance feel slightly smaller. Ramirez looked at Daniel again. "What do you miss the most?" Daniel didn't answer right away. His mind drifted again. Back to Texas. Back to a little girl drawing pictures at a kitchen table. Finally he spoke. "My daughter." Ramirez smiled. "How old?" 6. Ramirez nodded. "She must be proud of you." Daniel looked down at the sand. His voice softened. "Well, I hope so." But deep down, Daniel was beginning to understand something. War doesn't just change soldiers, it changes time. And sometimes, time changes everything back home. The desert morning felt strangely quiet, too quiet. Sergeant Daniel Carter stood beside the armored vehicle, checking his gear. The sun had barely risen, but the heat was already building across the sand. Private Ramirez approached him with a small map in his hand. "You ready, Sergeant?" Daniel nodded. "Always." Ramirez tried to sound confident, but Daniel could hear the tension in his voice. It had been a difficult week. Roadside explosives had been reported along the patrol route. Everyone knew the risk, but soldiers also knew something else. Sometimes the most dangerous moments look completely ordinary. The convoy started moving slowly down the narrow road. Engines growled. Tires pushed dust into the air behind them. Daniel scanned the empty horizon. Nothing moved. Just sand. Just silence. Then, something caught his eye. A small pile of rocks near the edge of the road. Out of place. Daniel raised his hand immediately. The convoy stopped. Ramirez leaned forward from the passenger seat. "What is it?" Daniel kept staring at the rocks. Something about them felt wrong. Too carefully placed. Too perfect. He stepped out of the vehicle slowly. Every soldier in the convoy went silent. Daniel walked toward the edge of the road. One step, then another. The desert wind moved lightly across the sand. Daniel crouched down near the rocks. His eyes narrowed. Then he saw it. A thin wire, barely visible, connected to something buried beneath the sand. Daniel's heart dropped. "Back up," he said quietly. Ramirez froze. "IED." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah." The convoy began reversing slowly, carefully. Every second felt longer than the last. Daniel remained crouched near the device, watching, listening. Then, suddenly, a distant sound echoed across the desert. A vehicle, moving fast, too fast. Ramirez looked through the windshield. "Sergeant, incoming truck." Daniel stood up immediately. The truck was racing toward them, dust exploding behind its wheels. Daniel's training took over. His voice became sharp, loud and clear. "Everyone take cover." Soldiers moved quickly, weapons ready, but the truck didn't slow down. It kept coming, closer, closer. Daniel realized something in that moment. The explosive in the road was only the beginning. The truck swerved violently. Then everything happened at once. A flash of light, a violent explosion. Sand filled the air. The ground shook. Daniel felt the force slam into him. Then everything went dark. When Daniel opened his eyes, the world was quiet again. Too quiet. His ears rang softly. Dust floated through the air. He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself to move. "Ramirez!" No answer. Daniel pushed himself to his knees. Soldiers were moving through the smoke, checking vehicles, calling names. Finally, a voice answered. "Sergeant!" Ramirez stumbled toward him, his uniform covered in dust. But he was alive. Daniel let out a slow breath. "You okay?" Ramirez nodded quickly. Yeah, I'm good." He looked around the destroyed road. "What just happened?" Daniel stared at the crater in the sand. His voice was quiet. "They tried to trap us." Ramirez shook his head slowly. Daniel suddenly felt something else. His hand was still gripping something tightly. He looked down. Emily's drawing, still folded in his pocket, still safe. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. And in that moment, something inside him changed. War had nearly taken his life, but it had also reminded him of something important. Every day away from home was a day he could never get back. That night, Daniel sat outside the base, alone. The sky was full of stars again, but everything felt different now. Ramirez walked over and sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Ramirez broke the silence. "You saved us today." Daniel shook his head slowly. "We all saved each other." Ramirez looked thoughtful. Then he asked something quietly. "You ever think about what you'll do when you go home?" Daniel stared up at the stars. For a long time he didn't answer. Then, finally, he spoke. "I'm not wasting another day." Ramirez nodded slowly. Daniel smiled slightly. "I'm going to surprise my daughter." 6 months later, the war was finally behind him. Sergeant Daniel Carter stepped off the military transport plane and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Silence. Real silence. No helicopters. No distant explosions. Just the soft wind moving across the runway. Daniel took a slow breath. Home. Around him, other soldiers hugged their families. Children ran across the pavement shouting. Wives cried with relief. Daniel stood still for a moment, watching, smiling quietly. But someone was missing. Emily. He had planned something special, something she would never forget. 2 days later, a small elementary school in Texas was buzzing with noise. Children filled the classroom with laughter. Colorful drawings covered the walls. Mrs. Thompson stood at the front of the room. "All right, class," she said. "Today we're going to talk about heroes." Several kids raised their hands immediately. "Firefighters." "Doctors." "Police." Mrs. Thompson smiled. Then she looked toward the back of the room. Emily Carter sat quietly at her desk. Her crayon rested in her hand. "Emily," the teacher said gently, "would you like to share your drawing?" Emily stood slowly. She held up a piece of paper, a simple drawing, a soldier standing tall, with a big smile. Several kids leaned forward. "Who is that?" one of them asked. Emily answered softly, "That's my dad." The classroom grew quiet. Mrs. Thompson walked closer. "Is your dad a soldier?" Emily nodded. "Yes." "Where is he now?" Emily looked down at the floor. Her voice became smaller. "He's far away." The teacher placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "That must be very hard." Emily shrugged a little. "I just hope he comes home soon." At that exact moment, the classroom door slowly opened. None of the children noticed at first, but Mrs. Thompson did. Her eyes widened slightly. Standing in the doorway was a man in military uniform, Sergeant Daniel Carter, dust-colored boots, combat uniform, and a quiet smile on his face. Mrs. Thompson covered her mouth in surprise. Daniel raised one finger gently to his lips. A silent request. "Please don't say anything." The teacher nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. She stepped aside slowly. Emily was still holding up her drawing. "My dad is my hero," she said. The classroom remained silent. Then one of the kids pointed toward the door. "Emily!" She turned, slowly, confused. Her eyes moved toward the classroom entrance. For a second, her brain didn't understand what she was seeing. The soldier standing there, the familiar face, the smile she remembered. Emily blinked. Once. Twice. Then the crayon slipped from her hand. "Daddy!" Daniel's smile grew wider, and suddenly Emily ran. Her small shoes tapped loudly across the classroom floor. She threw her arms around him. Daniel dropped to his knees instantly, holding her tightly, as if he would never let go. Emily buried her face in his shoulder. "I missed you." Daniel closed his eyes. His voice cracked. "I missed you too, Peanut." The entire classroom watched in silence. Some of the kids smiled. Mrs. Thompson wiped tears from her face. Because sometimes heroes don't arrive with loud music. Sometimes they simply walk through a classroom door and remind everyone what love looks like. The classroom slowly returned to its normal noise. Children began talking again. But Daniel was still kneeling on the floor, holding Emily. She didn't want to let go, and honestly, neither did he. After a moment, Daniel gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Emily looked up at him. "Are you staying now?" Daniel smiled. "Yes." Emily hugged him again tightly. The entire classroom clapped softly. But before leaving the room, Daniel turned back for a moment. He looked at the children, at the teacher, at the drawings on the wall, and then he said something simple, something that came straight from the heart. "Sometimes people think soldiers are heroes." He paused for a moment. "But the truth is, most soldiers are just ordinary people. People who miss their families. People who count the days to come home. People who hope that the ones they love are safe." Daniel looked down at Emily beside him. Then he continued, "So if you ever see a soldier, just remember something. Behind every uniform, there is a family waiting." He gently held Emily's hand. "And sometimes the greatest victory is simply coming home." To every veteran watching this, your story did not end on the battlefield. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And somewhere in this world, someone is grateful you came home. If you are struggling, reach out to someone you trust, because the strongest soldiers are the ones who keep moving forward. And remember, home will always be waiting. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs it. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. To every veteran watching this, you are not forgotten. If you are struggling, please reach out. There are people ready to help you. Veterans Crisis Line. Dial 988, then press 1 or visit veteranscrisisline.net. You are not alone. Some battles continue after the war. No veteran should fight them alone